We're happy to welcome you to our show tonight, Polygamy, What Love Is This? I'm your host, Doris Hanson, and the question of love is particularly sensitive tonight as we deal with some difficult issues, the subject being basically incest and also a very twisted polygamous family tree. When God said don't do it, no matter what he was talking about, he meant it. And he said don't do it regarding incest, and he said don't do it regarding polygamy. And we're going to be talking about those things tonight. We are broadcasting live from Salt Lake City, Utah, and this is a telephone call-in show. And our telephone number is 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820. And if you would prefer to ask your questions or make your comments off the air, you can email them to us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. We are grateful for our viewers who are watching our show from the Boise, Idaho area. They watch it on Sunday afternoons at KCLP Channel 18 in the Boise-Nampa area. And we are grateful for our viewers. You can also contact us by email, tv@aboutpolygamy.com. Of course, all of our previous programs you can watch on streaming video on our website, whatloveisthis.tv. You can access the top questions that are asked on the show at whatloveisthis.tv/answers. We do have a support group. We meet once a month, and we would like to invite anyone whose life has been touched by polygamy in any way. You're welcome to contact us. We'll give you the details about the support group, and we would like to invite you to come. It's called Life After Polygamy, and our next group meeting is on June 21st. And you can also, if you would like to find out how to receive free resources regarding polygamy, you can go to whatloveisthis.tv/offer. We are offering a DVD, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy, as well as a book entitled Is Polygamy Biblical? And you can find out about that on that website as well. For information about how we can help you if you're in a polygamy group, you can go to shieldandrefuge.org, shieldandrefuge.org. Now, we're not here to try and convince or force people to leave their polygamous situation. That's not why we're here. It's not our purpose. But we do know that there are many, many people who are in polygamy groups who would like to leave, who would like to get out, but for some reason or other, they feel like they're trapped. And they can be trapped by several different reasons. It can be economic, it can be fear, it can be theology. Maybe a woman has several kids and she just doesn't think that there's anyone out there who would or could help her. And they don't feel like they've got a future if they did leave. And so those are the kinds of people that want to get out that we are here to help. We want you to know there is life after polygamy, and we would like to be able to show you that we can offer you a support system as well as help getting out and help after you get out. So call our toll-free number if you have questions or you'd like to talk about your situation, and that number is 877-425-9993 for information about how we can help you if you're in a polygamy group and are interested in leaving. God knew what he was talking about when he warned that the sins of the fathers would become the sins of their children and also of the grandchildren and on down through succeeding generations. And Jesus knew what he was talking about when he said and taught that a bad root will produce bad fruit. Incest was an early Mormon polygamous belief and practice and continues in polygamy groups today. I'd like to quote from a book by D. Michael Quinn entitled Mormon Hierarchy Extensions of Power. And I'm quoting from July 15, 1886, where Apostle Lorenzo Snow prophesies from the pulpit that in the future, he said, brothers and sisters would marry each other in this church. All our horror at such a union was entirely due to prejudice, and the offspring of such unions would be as healthy and pure as any other, he said. Now, these were the decided views of President Young when he was alive, for Brother Snow talked to him freely on this matter, end quote. If Lorenzo Snow had been talking about anything, any kind of marriage other than incest between brothers and sisters, he would never have made the remark that people would be horrified at such an idea. From Joseph Smith, who practiced incest by marrying mothers and daughters, and he married several pair of those, and he also married several pairs of sisters, which God prohibits, to Brigham Young, who is guilty of the same activity, to Lorenzo Snow, we find early Mormon leadership condoned incest both by practice and by preaching. And so we don't wonder that despite God forbidding incest and the laws of the land also forbidding incest, that some contemporary polygamy groups snub their noses at God's command and at the laws of the land and follow the early Mormon example instead. In the book entitled Expose of Polygamy in Utah, A Lady's Life Among the Mormons, which was published in 1872, we read from chapter 10. Quote, "It is quite a common thing in Utah for a man to marry 2 and even 3 sisters. I was very well acquainted with one man who married his half-sister, and I know of several who have married mother and daughter. I know also a man who married a widow with several children, and when one of the girls had grown into her teens, he insisted on marrying her too. To this very day, this daughter bears children to her stepfather, living in the same house with her mother. A rather prominent man in Salt Lake City," she said. "He has several wives and several married daughters. Only a few weeks ago married a young girl, 15 years old. A child that was his first wife had adopted and brought up as her very own. He married her," end quote. And so we see that this is just a slight sampling of polygamist incest in early Mormon polygamy. And we would like to ask the question here that perhaps polygamists would ask themselves: why did the early Mormon and why do the present day Mormon polygamists use the Old Testament as their mandate to justify the practice of polygamy, but they will not allow that same Old Testament to regulate their polygamist activities? You can read Leviticus chapter 18, and you can also read many verses in Leviticus chapter 20 that prohibits incestuous activities. Why don't they pay attention to those as well? Now we're going to look at some fruit from this early Mormon root. Let's fast forward about 130 years or so and take a look at some more recent polygamist behavior. Not too many years ago, there was a polygamist by the name of Tom Green, and he made news headlines because of his polygamist activities. His first wife was only 13 years old when he married her. Her name was Linda. Then he married Linda's mother, Beth. Next, he married a niece of one of his wives, 15-year-old Shirley. Then he married Shirley's mother, June, and then he married June's other daughter, Leanne. By 1993, Tom Green had a total of 7 wives: Beth and her daughter Linda, June and her 2 daughters, Leanne and Shirley, and then he married Carrie and Hannah, and they also were sisters. And so we wonder if this is taking all in the family to a whole new level. The 2 older wives, Beth and June, later left Tom Green, which left him with 5 wives. And all 5 of these wives were at least 24 years younger than Tom Green. And so we have incest, and the word pedophile also comes to mind. Okay, now let's look at another product from early Mormon root. We're going to go to rickross.com on the internet, where I got this one, and this happened in 2008. It's a news item entitled "LeBaron Brothers Team with Lawmaker in Effort to Change Incest Laws." 3 sons of a southern Utah fundamentalist say their dad fostered at least 4 children with his own daughter and is getting away with it because of a legal loophole. "We have DNA evidence to prove that my dad is having children with my sister," one of them said. The LeBaron brothers, none of whom are polygamists, are exposing these painful family secrets. They believe incest is widespread beyond their eccentric family and is rarely prosecuted. He says many polygamy groups preach and practice incest. Let's go to another news item from rickross.com. We retrieved this news item, and it was published in 1999 in the Salt Lake Tribune, entitled "Kingston Gets Maximum Term and Lecture on Incest." David Ortell Kingston was convicted of having sex with his 16-year-old niece, who was his 15th wife. He was ordered to serve 2 consecutive terms, 0 to 5 years, in the Utah State Prison. In imposing the maximum penalty, the judge particularly condemned the incestuous practices of the Kingston clan. You have been taught in some way that relationship with nieces as plural wives are acceptable, and that's flat out not true, he said. An investigation by the Salt Lake Tribune revealed several instances of Kingston leaders marrying half-sisters, first cousins, nieces, and aunts as part of their religious beliefs. Most polygamous groups say that the Kingstons are the only group that incorporates incest into its religion. This news article goes on to say that if a child is conceived in an incestuous relationship, it faces a greater risk of being born with birth defects. Now we've set the stage for our discussion tonight. But before I introduce our guest tonight, I'd like to read a quote from a book entitled "Keep Sweet" by Debbie Palmer on page 9. Now this is a description of what a twisted polygamous family tree looks like. This is a true description. This is not contrived, but you must listen very carefully or you're going to miss some of the twists and the turns. Quote, "My father had 6 wives, and I have 47 brothers and sisters," she says. "My oldest daughter is my aunt, and I am her grandmother. When I was assigned to marry my first husband, I became my own step-grandmother since my father was already married to 2 daughters of my new husband. According to the eternal laws of the polygamy group I grew up with, I will be a step-grandmother to many of my own brothers and sisters for time and all eternity. Several of my stepsons were assigned to marry my sisters, so I also became a sister-in-law to my own stepchildren. After my mother's father was assigned to marry one of my second husband's daughters as a second wife, I became my own great-grandmother. This stepdaughter became my step-grandmother and I her stepmother, so when I gave birth to 2 sons with her father, my own sons became my great-uncles and I was their great-great-grandmother," end quote. Does anyone want to try and figure that one out? Do we have anyone in our viewing audience who would like to graph this family tree and send it to us? We'd like to see it. And I say, folks, this is polygamy. And we have a short clip here we would like to show you about this kind of a family tree. And so we chuckle at a song like this, but it certainly is close to the truth. And we've all heard the saying that truth is stronger, or truth is more strange than fiction, I think that the saying is. But at any rate, there's not really enough shows and there's not enough time for us to fully uncover and discuss all the abuse, the incest, and disastrous results that have surfaced as a result of polygamist inbreeding. But to help us discuss some of it tonight is a very sweet, a very soft-spoken and knowledgeable lady who has been with it, seen much of it, and she knows a lot about it. She's the daughter of a previous polygamous leader of the Kingston polygamy group. Both her mother and her father are now deceased. She frequently attends our monthly discussion group and is a great inspiration to us and a very good friend of mine. I'd like to welcome to our show and introduce to our viewers Connie Rugg.
Thank you, Doris.
Thank you for coming. It's a subject that's hard to deal with, and it takes bravery and courage to do what you're doing tonight, and I want to thank you, Connie.
Thanks.
For coming and doing this. So would you briefly tell our viewers about your polygamist heritage and how you escaped from its grip?
I grew up in the Kingston family, and I left when I was 17 rather than be the 5th wife of one of the polygamists.
Would it have been a
It
relative?
would have been a relative, and I was told that I had to marry a Kingston. Even though there were other families in the group, a Kingston was all that was acceptable.
And so you would have been inbreeding had you
Yes.
married this person. Okay.
Yes.
How many wives did your father have? Do you know?
13 is the most used number, but there were some that left, and the number changes up and down.
There's so many secrets that go on. Sometimes you
Right.
really don't know the whole truth. How many children did your mother have, and how many brothers and sisters do you have?
My mother had 13 children, 3 of whom are deceased. 2 were young mothers that didn't receive medical care and left babies. My one sister that recently died left 9 children.
Oh my.
And if she would have seen a doctor, she would have been fine.
They just don't pick up on the medical help like they should either. Are you shut out from having a family relationship with your family that is still in the group?
That's a hard question. I could have a relationship with them, but our ideas, our beliefs are so different that it's not attractive for me, and they don't want me to have contact with their children because I would be a bad influence on their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're afraid that you're going to corrupt them or lead them astray.
Show them that there is life outside of the group
Yeah.
that can be good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it can be very good. Your father firmly believed in pure bloodline, and he believed and taught and practiced incest. Would you explain how he came to believe it and how he came to incorporate incest into the theology of the Kingston polygamy group?
Yeah, and I'm sure that the early Mormon teachings were the basis of his ideas. But he also raised cattle, he raised pigeons, and he knew that through inbreeding you get a stronger bloodline. If you're going to raise prize-winning dogs or horses, you're going to inbreed to strengthen the traits that you want, and that's what he thought he was doing. He also talked about if you do inbreed, you're going to have, for every 10 children, you're going to have 1 that is a genius. But he also acknowledged that there could be several mistakes in those 10 children. And he believed that that was acceptable.
So the mistakes were worth it to get a
Yes.
genius. So do you think 10% of the Kingston group are classified as genius?
No.
But there's been a lot of mistakes.
Yes.
A lot of inbreeding
Yes.
mistakes. Well, let's talk about some of the genetic mistakes that happen as a result of inbreeding. But we're going to start first with the fumarase deficiency that seems to be plaguing the FLDS community in Colorado City.
Right, and the disease itself is very rare in the world. Arizona has about half of the cases of fumarase deficiency patients
Of the whole world.
in the whole world, and Arizona is where the FLDS are located.
Now, the victims of fumarase deficiency, they have suffer a range of symptoms, and this would include the inability to walk or even sit upright, epileptic seizures, severe speech impediments, failure to grow at the proper rate or at the normal rate, and some of them have some tragic physical deformities.
Right, right, and the recessive gene that triggers the disease has spread to thousands of individuals living in the FLDS community because of decades of inbreeding. And if both parents carry this gene, then it's more likely that their children will be affected. It's believed that more than half of the residents of the FLDS community carry this gene.
Wow.
Most of the children born with fumarase deficiency do not survive infancy. Those that do survive often suffer debilitating conditions and require constant care. They're unable to walk or care for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And they have, I don't even know, they had what, 20 cases or There were 20 cases in the world, and they had 13 of them, or something like that. It was an inordinate amount.
That was in the 1990s. There has been a lot of them in the last 20 years.
And one of the remarks was that this is just the tip of the iceberg, that they haven't even seen anything as a result of this yet, because their gene pool is filled with this genetic deficiency.
Right.
Now, the Kingston group has also been inbreeding now for about 4 generations.
4 generations.
I think they're at. And we're talking about severe inbreeding here. We're not talking about an occasional second or third cousin. We're talking about brothers and sisters, half-siblings, aunts and uncles getting, or it would be uncle and nieces getting married, and nephews and aunts getting married.
Right.
And
In my father's
cousins.
generation, it would have been uncle and niece. My father did marry one half-sister. Most of the focus has been on my father's children, and quite a few of them have married half-brother and sister, cousins, nieces, uncles, aunts.
And that's the first generation, and then the second generation. I know of some where there's an uncle and niece marriage, and then their children, will have deformities, and those children will marry half brothers and sisters and have kids. So
right now they're in the 4th generation of inbreeding.
Of the inbreeding. That's pretty dangerous. What diseases or deformities have they seen in the Kingston group as a result from this systematic generational inbreeding that you can tell us about? Now, we're not going to use people's names at all. We don't want to embarrass anybody, but the fact is they are having many bad cases of birth defects.
There's Down syndrome, microcephaly with first cousins. There are lots of kids with no fingernails, retardation, blindness, autism, rare blood diseases. One severe enough that the young child needed chemotherapy.
And this was one mother. Didn't one mother have 4 children with this problem?
Yes, with a rare blood disease. Kidney disease. I know of one mother that had 3 young children with severe kidney disease requiring transplants, and 3 out of 3 children. She finally left because she didn't want to have more children with this kind of problem. There was an albino baby. There are babies with missing limbs, missing eyes. Lots of stillbirths. Lots of babies die right after birth.
I heard one woman say that a baby was born. They didn't even describe. They just said it was kind of like a monster. It was just so deformed. And of course it didn't live.
Right, and a lot of their babies don't live.
And most of these deformities that you've talked about are from half-brother and sister marriages and
Cousins,
niece and uncle marriages.
And brother and sister.
Now, I've heard some remarks from some of the people within the group that will say, well, there's deformities born from people outside of polygamy groups. You can't blame that on what we're doing.
Right, but in these unions, sometimes there are more than 50% of their children have serious problems. And sometimes every child born in these unions has serious problems.
Has some kind of a problem. And children are born at home in the Kingston group. So when a deformed baby is born, sometimes they will just let it die, or it will just die on its own, and then the baby will die. It's not issued a birth certificate. They just quietly bury it.
Officially, it never existed.
Officially, it didn't exist.
They used to use midwives. Now it's mostly the father of the child that delivers the baby, and these fathers don't have any medical training other than what they teach themselves. And
now, when they let the babies die, there's no record. There's no one knows except for just these few people that are there
is always left with the question of what was wrong with the child. Sometimes there's no visible problem. And there's always the question of, was it something simple that could have been taken care of?
If they took it to a doctor or the hospital. Didn't someone you know want to let one of the babies die, but it didn't happen?
Yes, years ago, I was present. I arrived right after the birth of a child that was severely handicapped, and the father of the child was holding it in his hands, and it was obvious he was looking at the child and could see the handicaps and was going to let the baby die. It was obvious he was not going to revive it or try to save that baby. But there was a midwife present at that time, and she saw the same thing I did, and she took a blanket, put it around the baby, took it out of the father's hands and says, "We're taking this to the hospital. We're taking this baby to the hospital. You stay and take care of the mother." And that child is still alive now and in her 20s.
A mature adult, and she did have some difficulties, but they've all been overcome through surgeries or medical attention. And now she lives a full life. Oh my. So when mothers have these deformed babies because of inbreeding, and like we talked about, many of the mothers will have more than one child, they have several children like this. Many times the problem is blamed on her.
Right. Maybe she didn't eat right. Maybe she didn't obey her husband. Maybe she did something that her husband wants her to feel guilty for. So if it's her fault, then
then she gets the blame for it?
She gets the blame for it.
Even though it's genetic, they won't admit it. They'll give her the blame.
But if she was worthy in God's eyes, it wouldn't have happened. And that's what they believe. They believe that God is guiding them, and this is God's way of rewarding or punishing them.
And so they take absolutely no consequence, personal consequence, for the genetic inbreeding that all medical personnel would know is the reason for this disastrous results.
Primary Children's has several of these babies every year, and Utah, the state of Utah, is paying a fortune to take care of these babies.
I met a woman one time, I won't say who she was or what store we were in, but she recognized me from the show. She was a nurse up at the university hospital, and she said, you know, I see these babies all the time. I see the mothers, they look so sad, they look so hopeless, and you ought to see some of the sad children, the sad cases that we see for those children. So it's going on, but they just keep it so
Several every year.
And they're still inbreeding. They're not inbreeding maybe as closely and harshly as they were.
Yes, they are.
They still are? I heard that they weren't, so but I didn't know for sure.
Well, of course they say they're not, but they are.
Polygamous mothers, especially in this particular group, have no financial support from their husband. They are required to support themselves. And if they have 3 kids or 13 kids or 15 kids, they are still required. They're still required to support themselves and work every single day.
They go to work, they provide for the children, they pay their monthly bills, they pay their rent, electricity.
And their husband never helps them at all with this. So they have a special needs child, or more than one maybe, and pretty soon this mother is an emotional wreck. She becomes a special needs person herself. And so we've got failure dealing with more failure just because of the emotional stress and the burden that they're on. It's an emotional disaster.
Right, and there's a lot of major depression in the Kingston group. There's a lot of schizophrenia in the Kingston group. And a lot of these mothers that fell, the children that live through this and end up leaving, become suicidal. There was even a suicide pact in the group recently, and I hear that there were 8 people involved.
Yeah, I'd heard about that too, and I've received emails from young people in the group, teenagers in the group, where their only hope was to die.
Right.
They just didn't have
Very
any hope.
common for people that grow up like this to be suicidal.
Yeah, it's sad. It's very sad. I don't know how many of the mothers deal with it either, not to mention the children. We're ready to open up the telephone lines if you want to call in and make any comments or questions. If you have any questions to our guest, Connie, or to myself regarding the subject matter, we would appreciate if you would stay on topic when you call in. But our telephone number is 801-973-8820. Please call in with your questions. Weigh in on your opinion of this kind of behavior and activity in polygamy groups. Now, in February of this year, February and March, we had a guest, John Llewellyn. I think you know who he is. And he wrote a book entitled The Polygamy Rape of Rachel Strong. And I want to quote from this book on page 22. It was written in 2006. I think you'll find this very familiar, but I think our viewers will find this interesting. He said in this book, independent investigators obtained birth certificates of over 600 children that were fathered by 7 men in the Kingston group. It is common knowledge that the Kingston group practices incest to preserve its bloodlines. How many of these 600 children from just these 7 men do you suppose were conceived through incest? A huge percentage of them would have been. He said these birth certificates were turned over to the Attorney General, but in accordance with the policy of so many polygamists, where lying for the Lord is a star in your crown, many polygamist mothers lie about who the father is of their children's birth certificate.
Right.
And of course, I personally know that happened in my life. We never were able to say who our real father was. We had a fake father. I'm sure you did too.
My birth certificate doesn't have my real father's name. It has a name, but it's not a real person.
And so if you had married a half sibling, a half brother, and you'd had the same father, but both
legally,
of your birth certificates would show a totally different father. For both of you.
Right.
A fake father that didn't exist. And yet you're involved in the incest. Of course, sibling marriages are illegal. They are absolutely, and in Utah, cousin marriages are. That's right. Now, he said that there were 600 children born of these 7 men. How many birth defects do you think would come from these 600, at least that had the genetic recessive genes that would happen with close relative inbreeding? On another thought wave, I thought that I would throw this out to our viewers and perhaps we can get some responses. Let's look at the math here. These 7 men in 2006 had 600 children. We're in the 3rd generation past the first bunch of kids that these 7 men have had. Okay, so let's take a look at the 2nd generation and then the 3rd generation just to talk about numbers. How many children would the 1st generation have from these 600 kids? Now, these 7 men have had hundreds of kids since then. Many, many more hundreds have been born since 2006. That was 4 years ago. So if any viewer would like to tackle the math for us, tell us how many children would come from the first 600, then their children in the 2nd generation, and then all of those children in the 3rd generation, just to get a clear idea of the dangerous mushrooming consequences of polygamy in this culture. It would be interesting. I'll share it on the air if somebody wants to do the math and send it our way to tv@aboutpolygamy.com. I think it would be very interesting to look at those figures. Okay, we have some calls. We have an off-the-air comment. Dale from Provo, 150 people in one family has FSH, muscular dystrophy. Utah has the highest rate of muscular dystrophy. It would be interesting to know how many of them are in polygamy groups, if the studies have been done. Have you heard about any of that?
No, I haven't.
Whether, like maybe fumarase deficiency, because most of those are in the FLDS.
In the FLDS.
Polygamy group. Okay, thank you for that information. To our viewer who gave us that information, it'd be interesting to know just a little bit more detail about that figure. Okay, line 1, we have Marcia from Ogden calling. Hello, Marcia.
Yes, Doris, I have been very interested in your guests and your comments tonight, and I want to pass along the statement that I wanted to ask you the question, if you could kind of, if you happen to know feedback on it. My mother's half-sister, when she got married, they had a child. They only had one child. When we met this young man, he was about 14 or 15. He had MD, and she was attempting to look up in her ancestry, doing her genealogy, this kind of thing. I'm not sure if she was Mormon, but she strongly, very strongly felt that her son's MD came through polygamy and through the Mormon polygamous lines. And your comments tonight made me kind of think about this again. Mm-hmm. However, the church would not let her look at any records, which I thought was very odd. Can you address this? And you just alluded to the fact that maybe since Utah has the highest cases of MD, this might be the case. And I'll hang up and let you answer.
Okay, Marcia, thank you for your call. Of course, we don't know the answer to that because the highest rate of MD was from a caller that had called and left the message, and we just got that information from one of our viewers. It would be interesting to get what the figures are related to the inbreeding, and I find it very interesting that the LDS Church wouldn't let her look at the records.
They're usually very eager to look up family records.
They're big genealogy fans. Why would they shut this one off?
Right.
And not let her see them? I don't know if she could get a court order, if she even wants to go that far to get the records. But if she thinks that there's some inbreeding going on, she should know for future generations. She should know whether, and I don't know if she can get that or not, but she should try. I would try if I were her. Anyway, I hope that helps to answer your question, Marcia, and we do thank you for your call. We have line 2, Tate from Heber City calling. Hello, Tate.
Is this Doris?
Yes, this is Doris. You're on the air.
Alrighty then. Okay. My question was, as you were talking earlier about just the horrible thing modern day polygamy is, was early Mormon polygamy, I haven't exactly heard that early Mormon polygamy wasn't nearly as bad.
Well, what's the standard for nearly as bad? I read at the beginning of the show, as I was leading into present-day polygamy, I read early Mormon polygamy policy, preaching, and practice was incest.
Well, yes, but it wasn't sexual abuse or anything. It was more respectable and not so just cruel and harsh as it is today.
What's respectable? Tell me where you get the word respectable when you're dealing with polygamy and when you're dealing with the underage marriages and when you're dealing with incest. There's nothing.
Well, you respect your wife. I mean, you've got to have much love for your wife.
Well, the early Mormon polygamy and present-day polygamy, and this is not a blanket statement because there are some people who do live polygamy in a much saner manner than others. But if you've watched this show very often, I've gone into a lot of early Mormon polygamy incidents where there was no love between the man and his many, many wives. It was just a matter of grabbing wives and living polygamy so that you could become a god when you died. Men didn't support their wives, just like many of them don't today. Many of them do support their wives today. But, you can't take something that God has said not to do and call it respectable. It just can't be.
Well, according to more of the preachings was that polygamy was commanded to bring up the Mormon generation. I mean, both sides of my family, I have polygamy on both sides. Without polygamy, I would not be here. Well,
without polygamy, I wouldn't be here either based on what we're thinking, but God has a way of letting humans procreate and without polygamy. So we very may easily have been here. We just don't know who our parents would have been. But that still isn't the point. Mormons practice polygamy against biblical commands. Joseph Smith claimed he received a command from God.
Was commanded to do it. I mean, it wasn't exactly like, let's be polygamous, but
well, actually it was.
It was more of like a calling. It was only 20% or more or less that practiced polygamy.
Well, those figures can be easily disputed as well. I think you've picked up on some of the propaganda that the Mormon Church has put out. You need to dig into actual history that's not Mormon Cloroxed, but get into history where you really can get into the depths of the truths of early Mormon polygamy. It might shock you.
Oh no, my sources come from an anti-biased non-Mormon. He's a history teacher at Rocky Mountain Middle School. He is not Mormon. He's Catholic, actually, but he teaches U.S. history or Utah history, so they're not biased at all.
Okay. Well, I don't know what history you were reading, so I can't really say, but early Mormon polygamy was just as awful. In fact, it was probably worse because they were in pioneer days and they didn't have the amenities of life. Do you have anything you'd like to say here?
Yeah, I think if you go back to journals and letters that were written at the time, early Mormon history was probably worse than it is today.
I think so. I think from what I've been reading, it was worse. But anyway, we do appreciate your call, and we hope that you'll just look in all the history and find truth outside of what the Mormons teach.
All right.
Thank
I
you.
guess I'll have to call back another time.
Okay, thank you.
All right, goodbye.
Bye. I don't know what that last remark meant, but anyway, line 3, Clotilde from Taylorsville. Hello, Clotilde. Do I say that correctly?
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air.
Hi, I was wondering, or my question is for Connie. I was wondering if she's a first generation.
I am a first generation. My mother married into the Kingstons. My father was the one that started the inbreeding, so my mother was not a Kingston. But all of her children that have stayed in the Kingston group have continued with the inbreeding.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you, Connie and Doris.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for calling.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. I don't know what her question was, but she must. I wonder if she knows.
She asked if I was a first generation.
When she said that makes sense, made me wonder if there was something else there.
Connie,
she
what
wanted
is
to
this?
know.
Do you have a question for Doris?
Hello?
Oh, hi. Yeah, my name's Lisa. I was just being...
I guess we'll wait on that. I thought that one was ready. Okay, Connie, we see these things and we're closer to them than our viewers are, and I'm sure many of them are appalled at some of the things they've heard. And we've just skimmed the top. We haven't gone underneath and pulled out some of the ugly, hideous things that's gone on and the lying and the deception. But we also know that many of the children are born and raised believing that this is the way to do it, that this is godly, that this is okay, that this is the right thing to do despite what the public says, despite the laws of the land. It's still the right thing to do. But we know it isn't. What do we do? How do we educate them? How do we get to the point to where they would stop and listen?
This is really difficult because it's a closed community. They have their own private schools, and apparently with a private school, the teachers don't have to be accredited. So I know that some of the teachers that are teaching high school are only less than 18, 16 and 17. The Kingstons talk about the high rate of college educated people they have. But these college educations, most of them are over the internet.
So they don't even...
You don't even know if they're doing their own homework.
You don't even... And they're not out in public. They're not able to interact with other people that think differently.
Right. With the close community, they only have contact with family members that believe the way they do. Like I said, my brothers and sisters wouldn't want their children to know me because I have a different opinion than them.
Mm-hmm. And so again, we have to say brainwashing, and we have to say there is no free agency.
But
their free agency is based on what they want them to have, and that's all.
They believe and they teach that you have free agency, and that free agency is either to do what's right or do what's wrong. That's your free agency. Do what I say or disobey me.
Okay, that's true. I know, I was raised in it. It's not a pretty picture sometimes. Let's see if it's line 1 is ready with Lisa. Hello, Lisa?
Yes.
Yes, you are on the air.
Okay.
What's your question?
My question is, I was just wondering if, hi Connie, hi Doris.
Hi.
If so many of, I know that Connie had said that quite a few of the women in the FLDS are on antidepressants. They must not be happy living the culture or the lifestyle. And if they're not, I'm just curious, is it really hard for them to leave?
No, we didn't say that they were on antidepressants. They're depressed, they have serious depression, but they also are not receiving medical care. And they probably have a very low percentage of women that take antidepressants. It's very hard for them to leave because they have no contacts on the outside. This is not only their family and their culture, but all of their friends. They don't even know how to talk to people on the outside. They've never had a job on the outside. They've never applied for a job.
They wouldn't be able to, and they would risk losing their membership in the group if they got an outside job.
They wouldn't know how to find an apartment on their own because they've been given a place to live, a place to work, a car. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to obtain these things on their own.
Right.
Everything is regulated by the group, and so they have group think and they have group everything. The group is their life. They'd be lost outside of it. But that's what our ministry wants to do. Our organization wants to help those who are sick and tired of being manipulated and lied to, and maybe they just know there's something not quite right and they'd like to go out on their own. We're here to help them, not to try and say, come on, leave against their will, but if they are ready to leave, we'll help anybody out there who's watching the show and would really like to have a chance at life. We'll help them.
That's great. Well, I mean, if there's any way that I know that some of us, out here who are watching can help, maybe you can let us know either by donating money or time or whatever we could to just help out.
Well, you could go onto our webpage, shieldandrefuge.org, and there is a contact page and information about our organization that you might want to interact with at that point.
Okay. Sounds great. I'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Okay, we have line 3, Harold in North Ogden. Hello, Harold.
Yes, hello there.
Yes, you're on the air.
Look good tonight.
Pardon me?
I say you girls look good tonight. And I'm just going to make a comment quick.
Okay.
Excuse me, and that thank Connie Rugg there, and it takes a lot of courage for her to come on the air and talk about her life, and
Thank you, Harold.
That's appreciated. I was just going to say that I come from an LDS background, and that though mostly inactive my whole life, but I come from a polygamy background. I think my great-grandfather or great-grandmother 4 times removed was where we come from. And I was just going to say that, I thought I knew what polygamy was. In the last couple of years, I've looked a lot harder at it and was surprised, at exactly what went on in the earlier Mormon history with polygamy and so on and so forth. And then I was aware of these fringe groups, but really didn't pay too much attention with it and stuff like that. And so this subject that you're on tonight is really just disturbing. I just more of a comment that for the LDS people, I mean, they're just like that one caller. Was he from Heber City? And he wants to fight it and deny these things and this historical facts. To the truth, whatever the truth may be, stands on its own and will withstand all scrutiny, investigation, and rigor.
That's right.
And that if they would, open their eyes a little bit and go back in the historical records that we have so much that are so available these days through UTLM.org and etc. And see what really the early church was about and so on and so forth, and especially in the very beginnings and so on and so forth. And just open their minds and see what history says about it there, and make a judgment instead of being just following through their the whole doctrine. It's just blind and without and look at the contradictions in the doctrines as they as time has went on. So,
well, Harold,
that's all
thank
I
you.
have to say.
Thank you, Harold.
And that's very good advice. We hope that there's some people who listen to you who will do what you recommended.
Okay, great, girls.
Okay, thank you. Good night. And again, it's not only we're looking at the early Mormon history and how they, it isn't squeaky clean like they would like them to see, but let's take a look at the Bible. I mean, they are saying that God said, thus saith the Lord, do this. Abraham did this, Jacob did this, David did this, so it's okay for us to do it. But they're not even reading the Bible for all it's worth. They're just making judgments based on what somebody told them it means rather than getting in there and studying it off for themselves.
That's like saying because Cain killed his brother, it's okay for me to kill my brother.
Yeah, it's in the Bible. Exactly. Line 2, we have Jean in Salt Lake City. Hello, Jean.
Yes. My grandmother, my mother's mother, and my grandfather were born right down here in Provo back in the 1800s. And Brigham Young sent them over to Heber to start up the Mormon wards over there. Now, my mother was a Mormon until she was about 18, and then they left the church. My great-grandmother Smith, my great-grandmother, she had 13 kids, and the boys became polygamous. They married their sisters. They married their little nieces. And we've got retardation all through our family. My mother had a retarded brother. Her brother had a retarded sister. I've got a retarded son from that, and I've never been a Mormon.
But it follows
and I've
through.
had to put up with it all this time. I've got a granddaughter that has a little girl that has 7 years old. She's retarded. I've got cousins up in Berkeley, a little 5-year-old. He's retarded. My other grandson in San Francisco, they're expecting a baby in the 14th of this month, and I'm scared to death that child might be retarded. And we've gone through hell because of those dirty, rotten polygamists over there.
That's right.
I've never been a Mormon, and God did not give Joseph Smith a revelation.
That's right.
He did not. He got it from the devil.
He sure never got it from
the
God.
devil. It's ruined my life, my whole family.
And it's ruined many people's lives, Jean. It really has.
And that's what the Kingstons are facing for the next 100 generations.
Yep,
well, I think our government should step in and absolutely ban it.
Well, people need to speak to the government because it's supposed to be a government of the people and by the people. We need to speak to them.
And it's costing the people of Utah a fortune.
Not a religion.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jean. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we're just a couple of minutes now towards the end of the show, so we're going to have to close down. If there's anyone on the phone waiting to call, you can email us, tv@aboutpolygamy.com. And Connie, I want to thank you so very much for coming and sharing what you did. And
thank you, Doris.
We pray that you'll be blessed and that many people will be blessed by what you said. My closing comments are going to be based on the law tonight. If you're using the law as a way to earn salvation or earn your way into heaven, you're doing it all wrong, because the law was given not to take us to glory, but to show disobedient and ungodly sinners just how sinful we are. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 9, it says that the law was not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and the disobedient. The law was made for the ungodly people and for sinners. So if you're using the law as a stepping stone to perfection, you are merely proving and admitting that you're an ungodly sinner, and because that's who the law was made for. Now, Galatians tells us that the law was given as a tutor, as a teacher, to show us how badly we need a Savior and to lead us to Jesus. And once a person realizes that the law is a harsh and unforgiving judge of ungodly sinners, we quickly realize how desperately we need grace. And of course, grace by definition disqualifies any kind of works at all. Many people try to earn eternal glory by obeying a set of laws. That's what the polygamous groups do. But the law cannot get us there. The 10 Commandments is not a ladder where you work step by step, rung by rung, until you get to the top after you've been perfected and think that you've reached the goal. You haven't. The law was not made for that purpose. You need Jesus to carry you into heaven, not a ladder to climb there. Remember, on this show, we never say CTR. We always say CTT, based on Psalm 119. I will choose the truth. And we hope and we pray that our viewers also will search it out and choose the truth. Thanks for watching.